Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm happy to present this workshop on relationships in astrology. It is such an important topic and a subject that many people need guidance about, including ourselves. So it's a fascinating study because, as always, astrology makes us understand there is a higher order, that things don't happen randomly. And this applies also to the relationships we form, people we meet. Is there an evolutionary reason for people to come together? Is it just about romance, or is there a soul purpose? So we're not obviously going to touch on everything during this talk, but it at least gives us a glimpse about how far we can go, and also what astrology cannot answer. There are certain variables that are important to consider in this context. So this presentation is a promotional talk about the 2-year course that I'm offering in evolutionary astrology and in astrology practice in general. This leads to a diploma, whether you want to be practicing astrology or just want to study astrology for your own growth. This course does prepare you for professional practice. So it's a high standard, and we are covering basically the whole umbrella from absolute beginners to advanced chart analysis, so that you can begin practicing once you're done. So it's about a 2-year process. Some people take longer, but the minimum is 2 years. And it is a transformative experience because it's not only about data and information and measurements, but it's a spiritual experience in itself. If we want to be good astrologers, we need to be clean channels. We need to do our own work. And this process of study is part by correspondence, as students get the material at home and just view videos or read the books. And then we have 3 meetings in the course of these 2.5 years. We have 3 meetings in person, usually in the United States, unless there's a group in a certain country that has enough participants for me to travel to. So we've had group in South Africa, we've had group in Israel, and in Europe, but it really depends on what happens locally for that purpose. Otherwise, people can always join the classes that take place in the United States. We have an international community. It's a growing community of students. And as I said, this is not only about study in a dry fashion. It's a community experience. It's a spiritual experience. People go through the material and it can change their lives. Some of the content of the course, it consists of segments and workshops. The segments are a lot more material. It's about 30 hours of material each segment, whereas the workshop is about usually 5 to 12 hours of material. So it's very thorough and deep material, understanding the soul journey. So we go through the basics of segment A, B, C are the foundational segments, even though they do contain advanced material such as aspects. But then we move to nodal axis, outer planets, chart analysis, relationships, which is our topic today, and then prediction techniques, and consulting skills and chart analysis. Then there are workshops on Saturn, the Ascendant, Chiron, health, medical astrology, astronomy, reincarnation in astrology, and so forth. So 3 of these segments, segment 4, 6, and 7, are on location and take place usually in wonderful locations that are very conducive to this kind of work, spiritual practice, yoga, and some fun as well. So if you feel called and you can view this workshop, you can contact me and find out more. It is a commitment, both financially and in time. You will have assignments. You know, this is basically a course about soul journey. You know, you can't just wing it. You can't just study this kind of thing superficially. So it's serious, it's comprehensive, and it's a graduation process that really requires that you master this material and become yourself the messengers of the stars, and inspire, change people's lives, serve as a guide. So today's topic on relationships is obviously an important topic because, first of all, there's so much confusion in astrology, outside astrology, in the spiritual community. We know that relationships are part of our DNA, are part of our soul development, but let's understand how astrology gives us clues and meanings behind the different types of astrology. First of all, the relationships that we know about, different types of relationships. You obviously have the romantic relationship, which can lead to long-term commitment. You have family relationships, parent-child, siblings, business relationships, and so forth. So we're going to see how the chart responds to these different types of relationships, with obviously a focus on finding meaningful long-term relationships as we look at this whole wide umbrella. So we look at the wheel of the zodiac. Each sign has its respective planet. Mars rules Aries, Venus rules both Taurus and Libra, and so forth. So when we speak about Mars, we speak about 2 important aspects of relationships. One is sexual attraction, and generally an overall sense of attraction. Or I will say more accurately, Mars has to do with our instinctive response to other people. And this can be a compelling attraction, but it can also result in a very, very strong rejection. So Mars is one of the most complex archetype in astrology because it can destroy relationships as much as it can invigorate them and really take them to a powerful experience, an empowering experience. Whenever I see Mars in relationship dynamics, whether it's by transit or connections between the chart of 2 people, it's usually volatile, and it creates a lot of hot and cold. So it's the type of relationship that will not be on calm waters. You know, it will lead to a lot of highs and lows. And if depending on the rest of the chart and the connections, it can be short-lived as well. So Mars that bypasses our mental construction and conditioning. You know, it's not about what people will think or my own personal ambitions. It's about something very primal that it goes beyond our rational thinking. This is why you can see people who may be very educated, who may be coming, you know, leading a certain lifestyle, that are attracted suddenly to someone who is completely from another background and another socio-economic background, cultural background, and yet there's something there that doesn't make sense on the surface. Why are these two people together? But there's something deeper. There's something that can be sexual, and when I say sexual, I also mean emotional and spiritual, because our sexuality is a conduit to our other centers. So there may be a lesson about that seemingly, unrelated mismatch. So Mars is a powerful archetype that begs for a lot of attention in relationship analysis. Venus represents both our, Taurus side, which is our own relationship with ourselves. How do we get along with ourselves? What is our self-worth based on? So let's say if I have Venus in Scorpio, my self-worth will be measured by my power, by my magnetism, by my capacity to overcome difficulties and challenge. Whereas if I have Venus in Leo, my self-worth is measured by my accomplishments, my creativity, and how much do I manage to manifest in this life. So people who don't do much with their lives and have Venus in Leo are going to have a low self-worth. Now, the way we love ourselves is also how we relate to other people, which is the Venus in Libra. Venus in Libra has to do with what we need from others, what we share and can exchange. So if Venus in Taurus feels lack and I don't feel worthy, I'm going to go to the relationship hungry, lacking, and with a very poor currency. Think about it economically. You know, if the currency you offer doesn't have a lot of value, you're going to have to give a lot in order to receive very little. Whereas if your currency is strong, you give just enough to receive abundance in return. So this interplay between the two sides of Venus is very critical to analyze in relationships. And you can also look at the second, seventh houses, planets there, signs, and their rulers. Venus also relates to the type of people we're going to attract, what we're looking for. You know, if I have Venus in Sagittarius, I'm going to look for partners who ask themselves questions, who are looking for meaning, who are stripping layers, who can be really authentic and even raw, more natural, and very honest. So it's a relationship that needs a spiritual essence to it, but also needs a level of adventure and a level of naturalness. Like I don't want to feel self-conscious if my Venus is in Sagittarius. I want to feel free in my relationships. And typically people will say, for example, that if you have Venus in Sag, that you're looking for freedom and that you don't want to commit to a relationship. But it's not really true. In fact, you're looking for freedom in the relationship. You're looking for a partner that will free you. So it's a completely different nuance. So during the course, we're going to go very thoroughly through the different signs and different planets and how they each, what are their needs, what are their challenges, where, where are the gifts and the potential traps. And of course, always getting down to what the evolutionary lesson is. Like, what am I supposed to learn here? Because from an evolutionary perspective, if you understand why, then things can fall into place. You can better navigate your life, make better choices. It's not always as easy, easily said than done, but that's where we're going. That's what we're trying. Mercury has to do with the logistics of a relationship. It's very important, particularly in business relationships. If there are agreements to respect, if people need to work together, Mercury is very important. And then Mars is also important for business relationships because people need to do things together. So Mars-oriented relationships will need a goal, will need ambition. These are folks that connect because they have a challenge to meet. They have to face, that mountain. And so Mercury has to do with the agreements and the work dynamics, the distribution of roles, whereas Mars has to do with the operational aspect of a business relationship. Mercury also relates to siblings, how we get along with our siblings, what is the sibling relationship based on. If I have Mercury in Capricorn, maybe my sibling was a parent for me, or I was a parent, an authority for my sibling, and I had to be strong for them. So once again, a lot to peel and uncover there. The moon has to do with a sense of safety in a relationship, our ability to include someone really into our most vulnerable, intimate space. So the moon has to be really very safe for a relationship to unfold in a healthy way. And we need to analyze where people feel safe. Now, for example, if I have my moon in, say, Virgo, and my partner has the 4th house in Virgo, that's a moon house. So there's compatibility there. But what I'm saying, as far as the moon is concerned, is I need to feel that I can include this person in my family. They become part of my DNA. And the moon will be very sensitive to trust issues and inclusion and nourishment, of course, the ability to give and the ability to receive, to show vulnerability. The sun is really the worth that we put on other people, is similar to Venus. Obviously, the sun has to do with heart and heart-centeredness at its highest. So the sun has to do with our generosity. And if we admire our partner, if we look up to them, if we're inspired by our partner, so it goes beyond the safety and the working together. It has to do with the level of anticipation and the butterflies and the inspiration. So when there's a healthy solar energy, Leo, Sun, fifth house energy in a chart, we are in a relationship um, where people respect each other. They 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 elevate each other. They admire each other, and that's important because that keeps the relationship vital. It doesn't get boring. Um, the other thing about the sun, obviously, is creativity and children. If people get married, the sun will be a very, very important factor to look about fertility issues. And if this couple does want to have children, look how their sun interact and look at their sun individually in their own chart. We spoke about Mercury and work functions, making the relationship work, communicating, Venus in the seventh house, and then Pluto. Pluto has to do with a relationship taking us to a new frontier. So it's not just about attraction and about sexuality, which it includes that, but Pluto has to do with the fusion. You know, it's really two people becoming one. So let's say if the sun is 1 and 1 equals 3, Pluto is 1 and 1 equals 1. Scorpio, fusion. So Pluto has to do with the relationship, on the one hand, fusing and connecting on the deepest level, on the soul level, with your partner, but it's also coming out of it different. Each person that you meet, whether you become lovers or even if you just interact with them, will change you to some degree. There's something in the chemistry, in the exchange, that affects you on a mental level, on an emotional, spiritual, I don't know. Look at Pluto. But that's where you are transformed. And that's why Pluto also can be a very challenging force in relationships, because it doesn't, Pluto lives in a paradox where on the one hand, it needs a lot of trust in order to go deep. You know, I'm going to open myself up. I'm going to open my heart. I'm going to get naked with you, uh, emotionally, physically, spiritually, because that's the only way to really get to the depth of the relationship. So there's a great need for security and trust. But at the same time, Pluto challenges the relationship. It doesn't allow it to be stagnant. So it's constantly uncovering limitations, problems. So very Plutonian relationships can be confrontational, where one partner will push the other to work on themselves. You know, we need to go to therapy and we need to work on your mother issues, and why didn't you tell me this? So there's always going to be some kind of digging and upheaval that forces the couple to look deeper. But sometimes it is a deal breaker because it can push too hard and it can shatter the sense of security. What we say, coming on too strong, and then the trust becomes affected. Jupiter is about finding meaning in relationships. Why am I in a relationship? Why are we together? So it's those more philosophical questions. Saturn has to do with many aspects of relationship. For one, it can be our conditioning, you know, what we were programmed to understand as far as relationships go. If I come from a traditional background, you know, did my family or culture expect me to get married early? What type of relationship or partner am I expected to connect with? And we all think that we're Many of us can think that we're beyond that and that we're liberated from our conditioning, but it's working on us. We have to ask ourselves always, why were we born in a certain family or in a certain culture that conditions us in a certain way? So it can be part of the solid values that we got from our ancestors, from our lineage, from our family and culture, the good and reliable guidelines. And this also means that Saturn will attempt to bring credibility to the relationship. Is it really strong enough? You will see Saturn transits in particular to Saturn, Venus, or Saturn in the seventh house, where the relationship is tested. So there can be a crisis. I lose my job, and Saturn is going to test if my partner loves me enough to stick around when I don't have money. Or there can be Saturn also will, because it brings conditioning, it will also expose us to taboos, like what is allowed and what is forbidden. So under Saturn influences, people born with strong Saturn transits to their relationships will possibly experience. So Saturn can cause ethical dilemmas in relationships, where, for example, a person is suddenly falling in love with their friend's partner. You know, something that does happen to all of us, and it's unpredictable. So we then have Saturnian dilemmas. What's the right thing to do? And it's another test of integrity and test of credibility. Saturn also will aim at solidifying the relationship, basically wanting to aim for something that's reliable and longer term. So it's about, building the foundation for something to last. Uranus, we tend to forget that Uranus, the modern ruler of Aquarius, has to do with social connections with our friends and social circles and communities. So how do we interact with the community? Do we find our community? And because Uranus has to do with objectivity, why do we need friends? Quite often to give us objective advice. They're not immediately involved with our survival struggles, but they can share common interests and mental connection that gives us clarity. So when we have, for example, Uranian influences in relationships, it can also transpire into personal relationships when, for example, friends can become lovers, or when the other way around, people that have a very strong Aquarian influence can stay friends with their lovers. The other thing about Uranus in relationship is that it aims at upgrading the relationship. And so we want relationships that take us forward. Similar to Pluto, Uranus will also challenge relationships and test if we're moving forward together or if it's stagnant. One of the things we look for in Uranian relationships is someone who will have similar interests, someone who can challenge us, who can teach us new things. So there's an element of boredom if that doesn't happen. In relationships, we need stimulation, and Uranus is that great stimulator. So one of the issues that we can encounter with Uranus is that we form relationships and we may feel safe with our partner, but we may feel unstimulated, and then we lose interest. So we can have mentality gaps, or we can grow apart as a result of not having similar interests. So this is part of the Uranian challenge as well. Now, you'll often hear people say, well, Uranus is also fast, accelerating change. And that is true in relationships as well. Part of the reason is I need, when I have an influence, whether it's natal or by transit, of Uranus, I may feel that my life is stuck. And is my partner holding me back, or is my partner helping me to get to the next level? So these are all dynamics within that archetype. Then we have Neptune, which is a spiritual aspect of relationships. And at its core, Neptune dissolves boundaries and dissolves differences. So in some ways, people that have a strong Neptunian, Piscean relationship influence will easily connect with everybody because they find that common ground, that feeling that we're all on the same boat, that we're all looking for the same things ultimately. We all want to be healthy, we all want love, we all want reliable relationships. So in a way, Neptune reminds us that despite our cultural differences, our socioeconomic differences, we can connect with everybody and find something to share. So it elevates the relationship to a level of compatibility and spiritual aspiration. And it gives also a feeling that we can get over our grievances. So there's a very powerful forgiving quality to Neptune, the ability to move on, to let go, to not hold grudges, to start afresh, and not get stuck in the moment. Remember, it takes us to the bigger picture. If something, if a crisis occur in a relationship, Neptune helps just bring the wave and wash away whatever trouble. It soothes and it harmonizes the relationship. The challenge of Neptune is because of this openness and that ability to really connect with everyone, it also has a difficulty with commitment. So people with a strong Neptunian influence can either suffer from partners who who are not committed to them, and can never give them definite answers. Do you really want to stay with me? Do we really have a future? There's a tendency to kind of keep things open. Let's wait and see. Let's go with the flow. Let's not make any radical decision right now. And it can create a feeling that we're constantly living on a day-to-day basis and never having that firm sense of commitment and security in relationships. And if it's really mismanaged, it can lead to people who who can't say no to any relationship in a negative sense, which means that they are, philanderers and are not loyal to their partners. Completely flip side of, and the flip side of that is people who have these strong influences can actually choose a polyamorous relationship and openly decide not to commit to one partner. And so they can be honest about it and it can work for them. And then, there's no trust or trust problem or betrayal, because it's part of what's agreed upon and what's communicated. On a deeper level, Neptune brings a deep spiritual connection between people. They may share spiritual goals. They may find a meaning that supports their relationship. So it can also elevate the relationship to a compassionate and something that's beyond time and space even. So another archetype that I really want to add here, and as you can see the symbol of Juno on the side, Juno is an asteroid. It's not immediately related to a sign, but it's a very central component of relationship analysis, because wherever our Juno is in the chart shows, again, a strong attraction to others, as well as an ability to really form deep connections. So people who have a strong Juno connection between their two charts, or when there's a transit of Juno in the chart, it can really be a powerful relationship activator and help people find partners that are resonating with who they are. So this gives you a general overview of different components of relationship. Another thing you're going to look for if you're looking at parent-child relationship, look at Saturn moon, which has to do with family structure. Sun often is related to father-child relationship as well, whether it's me and my child or whether it's me and my father. Mercury with co-workers and so forth. So one of the things that we need to pay attention to is clients come to us and they may ask about existing relationships, or if they're single, if we see anything coming up. And our job as astrologers is to, first of all, understand the natal chart and understand what their core dynamics are. For example, I had a lady who just divorced recently, and she was asking about another, if there's something on the horizon. And we went through her her chart dynamics, and I could see that she was a very strong Capricornian type, with Venus being in Scorpio and Mars being in Capricorn as well. And I could see that on the one hand she wanted relationship, but she was suffering because every time she enters a relationship, she ends up taking charge of everything, taking charge of the partner. And because of that, attracting partners that are weaker than her or more needy, and her needs not being met. And so we may say, well, let's hope, the next one will be better. But it doesn't really work that way, because we need to get to her defense mechanism. And we need to understand why in the first place she attracted this kind of partners. Where it's very important to realize that most of us will feel safer if we are dominant in a relationship. The person that has more control is usually the person that gives more, but it's also the person who feels safer being in that position of giving. Learning to receive means you have to learn to be very vulnerable, because you give your power to someone else who will hopefully answer your needs. But it requires that you are open and that you give power to someone else. And when most of us have been hurt to some extent or another, we want to protect ourselves, and we don't want to expose ourselves so easily. So the tendency to want to maintain that position of leadership, or that position of the giver in a relationship, can be an escape. And so that's part of what we were discussing, with this particular client. And at first she felt like, oh my God, does that mean, all my relationships are going to be like that and I'm doomed? Well, not necessarily. It can be always like that if I'm not aware that that's what I'm doing. So the purpose of evolutionary astrology and this approach is to identify our challenges, because we can make a change. Because when we notice our patterns, we changed our pattern, and then that's when we can actually also break away from crisis and not repeat the same problem with this different people. So this is part of the study during the course, is to identify where people may repeat certain patterns. And what we need to realize is all of us are built of different energies. We're not just one type of person. We're not just a dominant type or, a fiery type. We have a little bit of water and a little bit of Venus and a little bit of Saturn. So sometimes when we see very different energies in one chart, say a person has a lot of Uranus energy in their chart and then a lot of Cancer energy. So Uranus wants stimulation and Cancer wants familiarity and intimacy and safety. So if both these energies are in my chart, how am I going to find that perfect match? The way it happens usually is that there's this role-playing dynamic that ends up manifesting, where I can attract a partner that will fulfill one of these roles. So I can attract a very Uranian partner who will be super interesting and bring new ideas and kind of fascinates me with her or his mind. And then I'm going to play the Cancer type, because that person is going to be the Uranus in my chart. And so we end up having role-playing dynamics. And it's as if my chart is on that stage and me and my partner are playing. One is going to be the Cancer, the other one's going to be the Aquarius. And so I'm going to be the nurturer, and I'm going to, make sure that I'm a good ear, and I'm going to cook the meals, and I'm going to really be present, whereas my partner is going to be social and outgoing. And then we can have frustrations because they may feel bored by just staying home and cozy. And so eventually, let's say the relationship breaks up, and I I feel like I don't want to attract that type anymore. And I'm going to attract a more Cancerian type to match with my qualities and compensate for the pain I endured with this other partner. But then if I attract a Cancer type, I'm going to end up playing the Uranus archetype. And so my partner now is going to be very family oriented and will not want to go out and socialize and travel. Whereas I'm going to feel like they are holding me back, and there's so much more to life than this, and they're not aware of themselves enough, they're not doing work on themselves. So the roles are basically flipping. And it may seem as if it's a completely different dynamic on the surface, but it's actually the same pattern that's played out in a different context. So these are the things we learn as we analyze relationship dynamics. So the things we need to pay attention to, what can, it's one thing to attract a partner, and it's another thing to maintain a relationship on a longer term. Most of us don't want to suffer from breakups, every few months. We would rather have a relationship that's fulfilling, but that is also sustainable. So some people may think, well, the moment I find my soulmate, it's all going to be resolved and I'm going to find the happiness I was looking for and the meaning. But in fact, the challenge begins when the relationship starts. That's not the end point. And that's a common illusion, is that the whole work is finding the partner. But in reality, the whole work is keeping the partner. So one of the things we need to pay attention to is the level of evolution. And that's something that in evolutionary astrology we pay a lot of attention to. We may have very compatible charts and seemingly, amazing connections, my Venus on their sun and same ascendant and whatnot, and it all seems like we have so much in common. But if our level of evolution is different, I'm going to express my chart, let's say, at a higher or lower level than my partner. And so we will experience gaps. So the level of evolution is not something that the chart can reveal. It's something you find when you meet the person. So astrology is not enough for matchmaking. It gives you a good indication of why people meet. And that's why I'm always recommending that people analyze relationship only once the relationship has started. Because we have to let nature do its work and have these people meet naturally. And once they come together, we then want to understand why they are together, what is their work as a couple, and where to take it and what to pay attention to. Where, you can look randomly at two people and see that they have compatible chart, but it may be that they come from completely different cultural backgrounds and like I said, and different evolutionary levels, and they're not going to get along. They're not going to like each other, and the chart will seem to not work even though everything seems to be in place. So really pay attention to that point. And we obviously learn about the different levels of evolution. You can also learn about that in my book, Astrology and the Evolution of Consciousness, Volume 1. So the chart also does not predict how long the relationship will last. Let's say you analyze the chart of a couple and they found each other, and then they come and want to get insights into their dynamics. You can put it on the table and analyze. You're learning about something. Um, you're learning to rebuild your sense of trust, or you're learning to um, to learn to receive more. Whatever it is, we can look at it. But then if people don't work on themselves, and if the relationship is not evolving, chances are sooner or later the relationship will not survive. Today also, we have to understand our cultural context. People put much more focus on individuality and personal freedom than ever before. If we look back at history and look back at our culture, whether it's the Western culture or the Middle Eastern culture, people used to get married, and unless there was something really tremendously negative and abusive, people stayed together for practical reasons, and so they wouldn't divorce as easily as they do today. So we need to understand the times we're in. Since Pluto got into the sign of Libra in the 70s, the divorce curve has really risen to a point where it's more common today to have to have more than one marriage or more than one long-term relationship than it was before. So that's part of also raising the bar in what do we do to keep the relationship going? Because before it was just enough to get married, and we would stay together until death do us apart. And today, it is until symbolic death do us apart. If the relationship is not thriving, if people don't really get along, they will likely not continue. So the chart doesn't necessarily give you, at least as far as I know, will not necessarily give you the length of the relationship, because that's a free will factor. If you do the work, if both sides do the work, it can last much longer and you can overcome these obstacles. And that's the tricky thing about relationship. You look at your own chart and you do your own work, but when you speak about relationship analysis, it takes two. So if one person works on themselves and the other doesn't, gaps will be created. And eventually this will not allow the relationship to thrive. So that's the challenge of relationship, is that it's not enough for me to do the work. I also need to rely on my partner to do their share. So as I said, always analyze the chart of the individual alone before proceeding to assess the compatibility. Some people will analyze a couple and they will say, well, your Venus is on, his ascendant, and it's a perfect match. But if my Venus is full of challenges in my own natal chart, just like I was talking about this client, and she tends to constantly create relationship where she's unfulfilled and where she's the primary giver and doesn't know how to receive, it doesn't matter how well I am matched with my partner, because I am going to repeat the same pattern. If I'm very defensive, if I have a Mars square Venus in my chart, and part of a Mars-Venus interplay is on an evolutionary level, the need to break patterns. So someone born with this signature comes from past lives where they experienced a lot of crisis. And in this life, there is a no more statement. I don't want to repeat the same mistake. So people with a Mars-Venus aspect in their chart will tend to say no to a relationship or to rupture a relationship faster. Because the moment they identify that it's not balanced, that there's a little bit of abuse, that someone tries to control them, or that the partner is not honest with them, they are going to eject themselves very rapidly. And so, like I said, we need to first of all understand the circumstances of the person in their own individual chart, where they're coming from, what is their story, what are their fears, what is the defense mechanism based on. And from there, see how this current relationship can help them or perhaps aggravate these dynamics. So before you analyze compatibility, first of all, understand each of the individuals on their own, what their relationship needs are, where are their sexual needs, emotional needs, and where are the evolutionary challenges, and take it from there. Now, we may see relationships that seem really difficult, whether it's the astrology that's difficult or whether we actually see that they don't get along. We always must remember that if people come together, there is a reason. Nature doesn't make mistakes. So how come this person, is attracting abusive partners? We need to work on the reason for that, rather than say, oh, just leave this partner because she's abusive or he's abusive. Try to understand why in the first place the abuse occurs, and why, if this happens again and again, why is it a repeating pattern? So you will obviously not encourage someone to endure abuse and say, well, it's your spiritual challenge, because there's nothing healthy about that. But you do want to tell them, okay, it's not a healthy relationship for you and you need to protect yourself, you need to possibly break up, but try to understand why it happened to you, so you don't repeat the same pattern. So when we look at the relationship from an evolutionary point of view, we want to understand the cause. Why we're together, what's the work we're doing together. And sometimes it's a very clear answer, sometimes it's multi-layered. So we look at the charts individually, then we do the synastry. Synastry is basically interposing one chart on the other and seeing how the partner affects me and how I affect my partner. And then there's a composite chart, which is the fusion of both charts that creates a third chart. There are two techniques for that. One is the midpoint composite, which basically means that we take the midpoint between two planets let's say my sun and her sun, if my sun is in Virgo and her sun is in Cancer, then the composite sun is going to be in the middle. It's going to be somewhere in Leo, very likely. And so I do that with every planet, or more precisely, the computer does that for you. And then you have a third chart. The other thing, the other technique is called Davison, which takes your date of birth and your partner's date of birth, and you count the days between you and divide it in two and find the middle date between your birthdays and ours. And then you find the middle place between where you were born and where they were born. And you do a chart for that middle space and time. And it's called the Davison technique, which is interestingly quite often very similar to the midpoint. You'll find that many planets are actually very similar in both systems. And they both have merit, so they're worth investigating. So, relationship types. We have same soul groups. So people who attract partners who have a very similar energy in their chart. It may not necessarily be that their planets are exactly on top of each other, but there's a very similar disposition, and there's a very similar repetition of patterns in both their charts, usually the same archetypes. Now, this is one thing I also pay a great deal of attention to, and I think many of my colleagues tend to oversee this, is that you also need to compare houses with signs. For example, if I have my Venus in Aquarius and my partner has Venus in the 11th house, or Venus in a tight aspect to Uranus, that carries the same energy. So we both, whether it's Venus in Aquarius or Venus Uranus, we both will gravitate to a need for stimulation and growth and changes in the relationship. So it may seem as though these Venuses are not in the same place, but they're actually reflecting similar themes. And so when people are in the same soul group, there's a sense of familiarity that's more immediate. It's comfortable. It feels right more easily. And so the relationship will, it's a great gift when this happens, because it kind of is a hand that fits the glove more easily. And so you will see quite often that this type of relationship will last longer, and they tend to resolve their crisis more easily. But on the other hand, they may not evolve so quickly. And it can lead to stagnation because you're kind of, dealing with a family member. Like there's a lot of familiar energy, but are we really challenging each other? Now, the opposite of that is the opposite attracts, where you have people who are diametrically opposite. Their chart is so different. One of them has all the planets in the fourth quadrant, which is more about public work and career, and the other one has all the planets in the fourth house, and they're very domestic and want to have an intimate connection with their partner. And so these people tend will attract each other because there's an evolutionary reason for them to represent the opposite side so they can reach the middle ground. So these are the most challenging relationships, but they can be very rewarding because we learn so much. But they tend to be more crisis oriented, because if I have all these planets in Cancer and my partner is always out um, working or has a public life, and the public duties take them away from home, um, it's going to be a struggle for me. So they learn from me about intimacy, about commitment, about being present, about showing up and actually listening to what the kids have to say and doing things together. And the other one teaches the Cancerian type to get over it, to not always be so punctual about the dinner, like, so we'll eat out tonight, what's the big deal? So they learn to basically teach each other. Now, this can also happen when we have an element in our chart missing. You will notice, let's say, people who don't have an element will attract a partner that has an abundance of that element. So let's say they have a lot of earth and air, which tend to be more rational, which tend to be more structured, need to be better organized. They have a plan. And then they have a partner that is all fire. Whereas, so the fire is obviously passionate and will want adventure, will want to be more spontaneous, and will want to be more natural, more outspoken. So the earth air type is more diplomatic, polite, even key temperament. They don't get carried away so easily. And the fire is obviously throwing tantrums and wants to have spontaneous sexual experiences. So we see here that it seems like their opposite attracts, but the person that doesn't have an element will feel that they want that element, and they will find a partner who can provide that. So if I don't have fire, I want someone to spice up my life. I'm going to be attracted to people who wear orange and red shirts, and someone, with an Italian temperament who is going to be more romantic and so forth, and take me out of my mind, out of my self-consciousness. And the other way around, if I have so much fire and I'm getting carried away all the time, I need someone to hold me back, to communicate things more rationally, and to break things into pieces rather than reach, firm conclusions too easily. Then we have karma mates. Karma mates are partners that come into our lives, usually from past lives. And there's something unfinished about our encounter. So there can be a strong attraction, but quite often I don't completely can put my finger on it. I don't always understand why we're together. Like, I'm attracted to this person, but it seems like there's something stronger, like destiny brings us together and we have to work on something. And quite often karma mates, can be the type of relationship where you end up having a kid with someone and you have to share, life with that person, not necessarily because you were head over heels in love with them, but because the child becomes the glue, and then you have to work on your shit, because life didn't let you just move on, and you're prompted to do deeper work on yourself. I'm going to switch on the lights because it's getting dark here. So we can see karma mates, it's a very common occurrence. And it can be a very positive relationship, but it's the type of relationship that answers a very specific need. Like, it's a type of relationship that really teaches me about working together, or about learning about commitment, or learning about spiritual development. And so I can feel that my life is enhanced in that particular area, but then I can feel lack in other areas. So it's a relationship that usually fulfills more narrow needs. And then we can have safe and supportive relationship, and that's usually a very healing relationships, especially if you see someone who comes from past lives where, or early in their life in this current incarnation, where they went through some kind of trauma in relationship, severe abuse, physical, emotional, and they felt really torn and traumatized. So, or they may have witnessed their parents go through an abusive relationship. So they attract a partner who will be safe. And that's, something that can be so important. And I noticed that especially with strong women who have a lot of fire in their chart, or Mars in a fire sign. And these women came from past life where they were independent thinkers and creative leaders. But because of the patriarchal cultural bias, they were repressed, and they attracted partners that tried to hold them back. Typically, they will attract partners that will try to keep them pregnant so they don't leave. It's a way to keep the woman at home and not have her develop herself and leave me. So I will keep her busy by making sure she gets pregnant. And so these women may come into this life with that post-traumatic stress and that difficulty trusting, and the fear of entrapment in relationships, which can then lead to a very strong defense mechanism. And so these women may attract a partner who is not going to be controlling, who is really going to honor them and honor their freedom. And they can heal and find themselves through this relationship. So on the one hand, it's a wonderful relationship, but there's a catch, and that the safe relationship will be healing for a few years until it becomes stagnant. And then the partner becomes more of a brother or a friend than a lover. So once again, we lack stimulation. It's comfortable, but there's no growth. So they complete their healing process, and then the partner becomes obsolete. It's like it's done. The cycle's done, and it's something to pay attention to, because these women will ask themselves, why am I in this situation? And it's important to look at the whole chart and to possibly see that there may have been a situation where they attracted initially, before that, very powerful partners that, really, had their juices going, but it was unsafe. It was a threat. And they were afraid of giving their power to that dominant male who could, again, subdue them. And so we need, each chart is a different story. I'm just using generalization here to give you some examples. And this way it helps us understand why we get into certain patterns and how to possibly make those necessary changes. So then you realize, and this person can realize why I've been in these relationships that were good, but not truly emotionally fulfilling. We also have to pay a very deep attention to soul entrapment. And this is something I can't go too deep into this session because it requires a lot of preparation. But you will also see in the chart patterns where there's what we call soul entrapment, where a partner is trying to control another, and it's not only in the current circumstances, but it's over lives. So they find their partner over and over in each incarnation. Sometimes because they want to own that other person. And it's usually through guilt, intimidation, and emotional starvation that they penetrate the subconscious and create this unhealthy attachment. The other thing we need to pay attention to, especially in our time where there's so much spiritual development, there's a lot of good that comes out of it, but there's also many, many traps. And that's the thing that I keep hearing over and over about people wanting to find their twin flame and wanting to find their soul mate. And of course we do. I mean, we're human beings and we all want to share, deep emotional growth and develop spiritually together with a partner. But we go back to the trap of, oh, I'm finding my soulmate and that's it. When in fact, somebody told them that, this partner is their twin flame, or they went to a reading, or they went to some, I don't know what method they used to identify that. And then the relationship becomes toxic for one reason or another, something in the chart. But because it's my soulmate or my twin flame, I can't leave. This is supposed to be the deepest spiritual connection. So they end up taking the abuse and they end up staying in these difficult relationships much longer than they should have in the first place, because there's a spiritual label to it that's very glamorous and very tempting. So we must realize that we live in time and space. And if we live in time and space, this means that there's always an evolutionary challenge. And even if we find the most compatible partners, we are going to meet dead ends and we are going to stumble upon walls. And we will need to doubt the relationship and put things in question in order for that relationship to grow. And not let those labels interfere with what's real, with what's actually happening in real life, and not, sugarcoat it with a lot of labels that are what I would say sometimes a spiritual bypass. Like I want to get to that point so badly that I don't realize I am neglecting to pay attention to things that need to be addressed in this relationship. And I may need to confront this relationship and risk it. When you are not afraid of breaking up, that's when you can be the safest in your relationships, because you're not attached to the ideal. You are present where you need to be, and you'll do the work that's required, and then it can grow in a healthy way. So once again, a lot of symbolism here. You can see these in these scenarios, especially with a strong Uranus and Neptune involved in relationship dynamics, but not only. Now, we have another phenomenon called same soul. So it's different from same soul group, but actually same soul. And that's a particular phenomenon that can occur when two people can actually be the same soul that's split into two. And you would think that these folks would want to stay together forever if they meet. So once again, it's very unusual to meet your same soul because you're actually not supposed to meet. The reason why you split is to intensify your evolution. So each side of your soul is going to work on certain aspects of your growth. And there's a reason why you shouldn't be, coming together. But there are always meeting points, like a DNA, where you come and then you separate and then you cross your path again until you merge back, not in this dimension. So usually there's a very strong recognition, this is a person that can fascinate you, but at the same time, you can't stand them. And you can't stand them because they remind you of yourself in a way that reminds us that we need something different from us in a relationship. We're not getting married with ourselves. We need to grow beyond ourselves. This is why the sign of Libra and Scorpio relate to relationships, because they are the sign that represents the other, what I don't have. So if you're meeting your own self, you can either feel that resistance, or life can lead to separation. It's like you live in different countries and it just, no matter how much you want to try to make it work, something happens and challenges the relationship. But there's usually, like I said, something very powerful in those crossings. So it's something to respect, that this same soul, needs to do its own work. We both need to do our own work. And will come the time to merge again. And of course, finding, the healthy, deep, meaningful, and lasting relationships. Some people, may have done a lot of work and they may meet their good match earlier in life. For others, it's actually through learning through crisis that they finally, find a good partner that understands them, and where they can build a solid foundation. The important component of a long and lasting relationship is obviously, the things we know. It's honesty, and it is a combination of safety with pushing boundaries. You know, uh, Safety enough and trust is not going to make the relationship last forever, because the sense of stagnation will eventually emerge. And on the other hand, if we're in a constant relationship that's constantly stimulated and challenged without enough security, it won't last either. So usually, you see some of these amazing stories of couples that stayed for 60, 70 years together, and they die 2 days apart, or on the same day, because they can't stand being away from each other. And you see how deep their connection was. But you have to realize that this beautiful connection is beautiful because it works for where they are at. So for this incarnation, they were able to answer each other's needs, and they were able to complement each other. And maybe they will continue to do that over some more incarnations. But on the other hand, some people may, if you have a lot of Aries and a lot of Scorpio and a lot of Aquarius in your chart, your metabolism is much faster. And you change much faster because you constantly doubt yourself, doubt what's around you, and dig for deeper questions. So people who have that high octane intensity will not necessarily be able to, have these 60-year-long relationships unless the partner really matches that rhythm. Either a partner balances them and provides the safety that they need to go through their transformations, or the partner evolves with them. But from my experience, the most successful relationships are the relationships that are either, two people who find themselves and they are able to overcome their challenges without getting too attached to the problem. So they are the going with the flow type, and they connect to that sense of security and familiarity, or they are relationships that are able to morph, to change form, to experiment, and to stay on the same level, but a changing level, so growing together. My best advice always with people is to surrender, to relinquish the ideal that a good relationship is necessarily forever. You can have an amazing relationship for 5 years, for 10 years, and yet you reach that point where you've done the work together, where you answered each other's needs, and now you need to grow somewhere else. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with either one of you. It's just a matter of time. We live in time and space, and we live in cycles. And these cycles each require a different dynamic. So when we let go of the ideal that a good relationship is necessarily forever, um, we can actually live more relaxed and more at peace with the current relationships we have. And quite often, when this is the case, the relationship actually lasts longer and is more meaningful. So these are, factors to look into, conditions, cultural conditioning that we need to maybe observe and analyze. Now, what to look for in charts, compatibility. As I said earlier, you do need someone who is more or less at your level of evolution. So someone who shares the same values, someone who has the same emotional intelligence as you do. And that's, without judgment, it can be that two people are not aware of themselves, and that's why they're a good match, because they're both, sharing those values, and maybe materialism is what they want. And they can, they can thrive together because they are meeting each other and have the similar goals and ambitions. So how do we respond to our cultural conditioning? What kind of value system we have, our emotional intelligence and our belief system. So the chart can give you some clues about that, but it will not be definite. Now, if I have, if my Jupiter is in Libra and my partner's Jupiter is in Sagittarius, our belief system is relating to Jupiter. So I cannot know just from the sign it's in what my belief system is. I can know that with Jupiter in Sag, I'm going to look for deeper and higher meaning for my life. But I don't know what that meaning is. Whereas the other person with Jupiter in Libra will tend to be more versatile with their belief system. They will tend to study about other cultures. They will like to be, anthropologists who adopt other people's belief systems. So there's more of a chameleon quality to the Libra quality. And these people may get along if they are both seekers. But if they're not on the same level, and one is extremely conservative and the other one is more eclectic or more holistic, doesn't matter what sign it's going to be, it's not going to work. I hope this makes sense. So a good astrological connection: Sun, Moon, Venus, Juno, angles, ascendant, descendant, MC, IC, and nodal axis. When you put this mix together, and there's a lot of interplay between these components in the chart, between two people, you can have usually good resonance and a strong connection. That doesn't mean without challenge, but it means that you at least have more flexibility to work on things. And that even if there are problems, you have a way to round corners, to support each other. So it can be Sun on Moon, or Venus on Juno, or nodes on nodes. It can cross-pollinate between these 6 components. Now, that's not an absolute, right? You need to look at the whole chart, but this is a start. Now, always in the chart, as we said, you need an element of security, which is familiarity with your partner. You need common grounds. And then you need the challenge, someone to take you to the next level, to push you to the next frontier. That's what, that combination will be something that will be the most meaningful and compelling in many cases. So I want to look at some examples to give you, a way to apply this. And I chose this chart of Hillary and Bill Clinton. So let's look at them individually, first of all. You don't want to mix them before you analyze them separately. So you see that Bill is born with Mars, Neptune, Venus in Libra on the ascendant. So Mars and Venus are sandwiching Neptune. And what did we say about Neptune influence in relationships? And Venus in its own sign of Libra. This is someone who will round corners, who tends to be more passive, who tends to adapt to his partners. And as we said with Neptune, he doesn't have boundaries. He tends to say yes easily. And this is why, people around him can like him, because there's something very accessible, very supportive, and very passive about him. Very agreeable. And then you have a moon in Taurus, which is also not confrontational. It's a Venusian moon in an 8th house of Taurus. So you see there that his intimacy, his emotional nurturing is immediately associated with sexuality, 8th house Taurus. So his way of nurturing people is through sex. At least that's one important avenue. And it's also through resources and financial components can also intervene in the emotional nurturing. So this can be a person who buys presents to someone when he wants to show affection. Taurus will bring something tangible to express feelings. But overall, this strong Leonian signature, so you see that this is someone who is ambitious, who wants to be, a leader. And yet you see that he's someone who doesn't like confrontation, who tends to be passive-aggressive, who is a pleaser in many ways, both from the Leo side and the Libra, Neptune side. And he's someone who's very excited at the same time, because everything is in the 1st house. Mars is on an angle, which is very carnal. So definitely here, the polyamorous qualities are emphasized. And someone, if he's in a relationship, he will tend to attract very dominant partners because he's adaptable. So he needs an anchor. He needs someone to bring all this diffused Neptunian energy into a form. And you look at Hillary Clinton's chart, and her time of birth is speculative, but that's what we're working with. And she's born with this huge stellium in Scorpio, including Venus in Scorpio, and Venus squares Mars, Pluto. So Venus squares the rulers of Scorpio, both Mars and Pluto in Leo. Now we said that, women with a strong Mars in a fire sign are going to be very independent, and they are going to be very creative and want to accomplish themselves. So this is a woman who will naturally be very defensive and not give trust easily. all the Scorpio aspect of it. And you see that the Mars in Leo square Venus in Scorpio shows that she's constantly battling between the need for intimacy, Venus in Scorpio, the need to merge with someone and to feel accepted, versus the need to be independent, ambitious, and do my own thing. So she's constantly battling between together or on my own, do my own thing or do it together. And interestingly, Bill has this also a conjunction between Venus and Mars. So they're both born between, in a very prominent Mars-Venus cycle. She's in the square, he's in the conjunction. But you see that because her Mars-Pluto squares her Venus, and because she's a strong Scorpio type, she's going to be confrontational. She is going to not trust easily, and she's going to be very protective, and she's going to be the boss. And part of the reason why she needs to be the boss, in a way, is because she's afraid of giving her power to a man. Mars in Leo women will attract powerful men, but at the same time will be afraid that this man will take it all and will run away with their life. We talked about this issue about, a man trying to keep the woman at home. So she finds Bill Clinton, who supports her ambition from early on. And he, with all his Libra and Neptune, he doesn't get into her drama of the Scorpio Leo as much. It's like he lets her have it. And he says, it's okay, Hillary, I'll do it. I'll go and empty the trash for you. And you don't need to be so angry, and you don't need to doubt me. So you see that he's going to adapt to her insecurities and her her defense strategy and impulses, but to a certain degree, because he has a boundary problem. So you see a woman who has tons of tons of Scorpio, and Scorpios suffer from a fear of rejection. They don't give trust easily because they have been betrayed. And a woman who has Mars in Leo and she wants to be the center of attention, she needs to be admired and put on a pedestal. And so she attracts this partner who actually supports her and puts her on a pedestal. But what's the catch? He puts others on pedestals as well. So he makes every woman feel like $1 million. And then she feels betrayed, of course. And in a typical Scorpionic Venus square Mars, she's kicking him out. And you can bet a lot of money that Bill was at the door more than once in the course of their marriage. And if it wasn't for their public life, it would have happened much earlier already. So you see that she probably confronted him. She has a lot of anger in relationships because as a Scorpio with Mars Pluto, she holds the grudges. She doesn't let go easily. And yet she needed a partner that's more passive, that's not going to fuel that fire, but a partner that will diffuse her intensity. And in a way, they are opposite attracts. So it's a very challenging relationship, but it worked for one reason or another. They're still a couple, and we don't know everything, but from what we can see in the chart is part of the reason it works on a longer term is that he can manage her intensity, or he can escape from her intensity, and he balances her intensity. And on the other hand, she teaches him that he cannot get away with everything he's doing, and he cannot manipulate his way with passive aggressive behavior constantly and play nice and put a smile on and think that everything's forgiven after makeup sex. She's gonna hold him more accountable. And you see her Saturn is on his sun, and that's what we're seeing here. That's, he's in the center, she's in this bi-wheel, and you see her Saturn on his sun, and you see that Saturn is the test of integrity. It's about all these ethical dilemmas. Should I stay or should I go? Is the relationship surviving the taboos? And obviously, part of the glue here with the Saturn sun is the commitment to their child. Child is sun. Saturn is the parental responsibility. So you see that part of what got them to stay is both their ambition as political figures and their daughter, Leo. You also see that Bill's moon is on Hillary's north node. And that's one of the strongest connection in astrology, is when someone's moon or someone's Venus is on your nodes, especially the north node. It's a very compelling and strong glue, because there's a sense of safety, because it gives that capacity to return to the basics. After we had disagreement, we can share that mood, share that family, share that sense of security. So it gives a sense of safety despite it all. Now, that's not always absolute. Not everybody with the moon north node or Venus north node will stay forever together. You need to look at everything else, and there's the free will factor. Are they working on themselves? But it is a support to the relationship. So as we said, her whole Scorpio stellium squares his Leo stellium. His Pluto's on her Mars, square her Venus. So you see the wounding is there. You see that he betrayed her, that there were violations of trust. And you see, on the other hand, that there were many power struggles between them. But let's look at another component here that is actually supportive, is that her sun is conjunct his Juno. So, some may say 7 degrees away is too much, but no, it's not. Proof is there's a connection there, and trust me, that Juno sun got them stay together, along with the node moon connection. So this is a good chart of opposite attracts, and how someone very confrontational, emotionally intense, and someone who's going to be more doubting and not, just gloss over things, attract someone who is passive, who tends to be agreeable, who may keep things more on the surface. They teach each other those polarities. Another example is a couple who also stayed together for many, many years, and living the life in Hollywood. They're both Hollywood actors. Paul Newman, obviously a superstar, and their marriage was legendary in that they defied all the Hollywood stereotypes, and he didn't have any affair. and they were a solid couple that really loved each other and stayed together until he passed. And so you see that in his chart, there's one quote that he was saying, why would I cheat? And why would I want hamburgers if I have a good steak at home? That's how he put it. So what you look at his chart, you see that he has a lot of Capricorn rising, Capricorn Venus, Mercury's right on the ascendant, and the sun on the south node, so he's born on an eclipse, the moon just, a few hours of, maybe a day after the eclipse. And the moon is in Pisces. So you see that he's a very autonomous person, very strong, very bright, Capricorn, I'm in charge, Aquarius, I'm intelligent, and I'm thought-provoking, activist. The moon in Pisces, is a very compassionate moon, but it's not always a very personal. It's the type of moon that loves everybody, but is not no one specifically. So it works, for the film industry, because it's this Hollywood charisma that comes through that Pisces moon. And then, there are other components in the chart, but you see that he's born with Venus in Capricorn, which is going to look for that good, reliable, strong, lasting relationship, something solid, from the Midwest where he was born, old time values. But that Venus opposes Pluto. And you see there were likely a lot of challenges about attachment disorders and about intimacy, even though, they were a powerful and lasting couple. And now we look at her chart and we see the same chart. They have the same ascendant, pretty much. She has a sun in Pisces and the moon in Aquarius, which is reversed from him. And her Venus conjuncts the sun. And so everything is in the same area of the chart, like this first quadrant. And we see a repetition of themes here. And this is a classic example of a same soul group. They're not just from the same family biologically, they're not just in the same marriage. Their soul come from the same origin. And so there's an immediate sense of familiarity. And they can understand each other without words because they resonate with that commonality. So it doesn't matter even, how exactly the degrees match or not. You just look at the structure of the chart, of the signs involved, and you see that they are complementing, not complementing, but they are resonating. They have that familiarity that's immediately recognizable. And so they share those values. And, if we look at her chart with the Venus sun in Pisces, like we say, Pisces tend to also round corners, be adaptable. So she's going to be okay with her, larger than life husband. They were both movie stars, but he was obviously more recognizable than she was. And in many ways, you know, you can see that she has Pluto in the 7th house. And someone with Pluto in Cancer in the 7th house has trust issues. No way around that. It's going to happen. It's opposing Juno, the relationship. So you bet that that Pluto in the 7th house was not always, you know, sleeping very soundly when he was touring or he was filming on set with other pretty ladies. You know, her Venus in Pisces was very understanding and very trusting, sometimes naive about it. But you bet that that Pluto was not always feeling safe and was not always secure and trusting. But whatever happened, if anything happened, they did manage to make it work because there's such a compelling connection between their chart. And, you know, this is basically the synastry, where you see the ascendant matching, you know, you can even see Venus is on her Juno, and even though their moons, you know, we talked about sun moon interchangeable. Basically, his moon is the midpoint between her sun moon. So her sun moon has 15 degrees, you know, between 24 Aquarius and 8 degrees Pisces, there are about 6 and 8, 14 degrees. So the midpoint is 7 degrees beyond that, which is exactly 1 Pisces. So his moon is exactly on her moon sun midpoint on top of the same soul group. And that's indeed a very powerful match that, you know, is bound to 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 connect these souls for a long time. And even if they were to break up, they would stay friends. They would be in each other's life. You know, they would. The connection is very, you know, is on a soul level. So I hope this inspires you, and I hope you want to learn more. So I invite you to join, you know, to think about or to actually make this step and join this fabulous program, and basically learn not just about relationships, but about personal development, soul journey. I know there's so many ways astrology can help people. We are the modern priests. And so if this program is rigorous, it's because we need to be careful when we do soul work. So you can email me or you can go to my website. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to see you here or there. Enjoy.